The stage lights slowly fade. A single violin note lingers in the dark, fragile, like morning mist drifting across the southern fields of America. In that moment, the crystal-clear voice of Alison Krauss rises, a voice so pure it once silenced the world into listening. She was the queen of the fiddle, the Crystal Woman of Bluegrass, a prodigy who turned rustic folk melodies into timeless art. In her hands, the fiddle was never just an instrument. It was a doorway, leading audiences into a world both delicate and radiant. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. That voice fell silent. Concerts were canceled. Interviews disappeared, and even her closest bandmates spoke of her only in careful, guarded words. Rumors spread quickly. Was it exhaustion, burnout, or a hidden fracture within a career that seemed unshakable? The spotlight that once crowned Alison Krauss slowly drifted backstage, replaced by a silence that felt endless. And across millions of hearts came the same haunting question. Why did Alison Krauss vanish at the very height of her glory? And what truly happened behind that velvet curtain? We'll find the answer right after this. Early life, before the lights of Nashville found her, before the glitter of Grammy trophies outshone everything else, Alison Krauss was just an ordinary girl in the American Midwest, where endless fields stretched to the horizon, where sleepy streets hummed with the crackling sound of old radios playing country and bluegrass songs. Alison Maria Krauss was born on July 23, 1971, in the small town of Decatur, Illinois. Her father, a German-born mechanical engineer, was a practical, quiet man who loved European folk music. Her mother, of Italian descent, was sensitive, artistic, always encouraging her children to find joy in creativity. In that modest home, in those simple days, Alison discovered the language she would one day use to speak to the entire world: music. At just a few years old, her mother enrolled her in classical violin lessons. But unlike other children who stuck to rigid school exercises, Alison secretly tuned in to the radio. There she found the high, lonesome sound of Bill Monroe, the Stanley Brothers, and the tender voice of Dolly Parton. For a little girl from Illinois, it was another world, one of mandolins, fiddles, and banjos, carried by voices rough yet overflowing with emotion. From the very beginning, Alison was enchanted by the fiddle. Her tiny fingers pressed the strings, bowing with patience and persistence, as though music wasn't just a hobby, but destiny. Her parents had no idea that inside their shy daughter was the rare ability to channel the emotions of an entire generation through the voice of her instrument. By age 10, Alison was already entering fiddle contests. In dimly lit community halls, a small blonde-haired girl with wide, sparkling eyes would step onto the stage, clutching a fiddle nearly as big as her own body. At first, her hands trembled, but within seconds, the nerves vanished. The bow danced across the strings with fire, producing melodies sharp, precise, yet achingly full of feeling. Audiences gasped. How could a child play with such depth? Within just 2 years, she became a sensation. At 12, Alison had already won competitions across Illinois, Kentucky, and Tennessee. Local papers began calling her the fiddle prodigy. She wasn't just competing against other children, she was defeating grown men in a tradition long guarded as a man's game. Alison had done the unthinkable. She entered a world full of prejudice and conquered it with talent alone. But for Alison, victory was never the point. Behind every trophy, beyond every burst of applause, her only joy was simple: to play music. Music was where she breathed, where she escaped the dull routine of small-town life, where she could paint her own world with sound instead of words. By her early teens, Alison began to wonder, could this passion become her life? Or was it only a fleeting dream? Then destiny opened a door. A small but respected bluegrass label, Rounder Records, took notice of the prodigy. And at just 14 years old, Alison Krauss signed her first recording contract, becoming one of the youngest artists in bluegrass history to ever step into a professional studio. In that little recording room, a new chapter of American music was being written by a 14-year-old girl who already carried within her the soul of a generation. Early career. Not every childhood dream is laid out on a red carpet. For Alison Krauss, the journey from a fiddle prodigy to a professional artist was like a river, sparkling in the sunlight, yet full of hidden rapids and treacherous turns. At just 14, Alison signed a contract with Rounder Records, something almost unheard of in the bluegrass world. While her peers spent their teenage years at school dances and summer hangouts, Alison's childhood closed its doors. She had stepped into a world where expectations were heavier than her small shoulders could bear. Her first album, Too Late to Cry, 1987, was released when she was only 16. On the cover, she looked like a slender young girl with bright, curious eyes. But behind that innocent smile lay a crushing pressure. How do I prove I belong? In the studio, Alison often sat quietly, her hands trembling as they held the fiddle. Seasoned musicians and sound engineers watched her with curiosity, even doubt. Could a girl not yet old enough to drive truly carry the weight of a professional record? The unspoken questions filled the room like smoke. And even if no one said it aloud, Alison felt every ounce of that skepticism beating in her chest. At the time, bluegrass was still seen as the territory of Southern men who had spent decades on the road. A teenage girl from Illinois was an outsider, an anomaly. To many, Alison was more of a novelty act than a real artist. Newspapers sometimes dressed her up with flashy words, like child star. But beneath the praise was a lingering suspicion. Would she last? Or was she just a shooting star, destined to fade? She not only had to prove herself on stage, but also learn how to balance youth with professionalism. While her classmates were out at football games and weekend parties, Alison was crammed into vans, traveling endless highways to state fairs, tiny clubs, and makeshift stages with crackling sound systems. In the memory of many who saw her then, Alison was that small girl with a fiddle nearly as tall as her body, stepping onto the stage in silence, then suddenly setting the room ablaze with her luminous playing. Yet behind the stage lights were long, lonely nights, cheap hotel rooms, rushed dinners, and moments when Alison asked herself quietly, "Am I losing my youth to this?" The pressure didn't only come from outside. Alison carried a perfectionism so intense it bordered on brutal. Every take, every note she played over and over, afraid it wasn't delicate enough, pure enough. If it isn't perfect, maybe it shouldn't exist at all, she often thought. That drive for perfection left her sleepless many nights, trapped between the thrill of success and the terror of failure. Joining Union Station gave Alison her first real anchor. But even then, the age gap made things complicated. The band members were older, seasoned veterans. They cared for Alison, but they also knew she had a long road to maturity. In rehearsals and meetings, she often stayed silent, nodding, listening, afraid that one wrong word would reduce her again to the label of child prodigy instead of a true musician. In 1989, Alison and Union Station released Two Highways. It wasn't a commercial blockbuster, but it was a turning point. For the first time, Alison was recognized not only for her youth, but for her seriousness, her artistry, her unique voice within bluegrass. Still, the road was steep. She fought daily against the fear of failure, against the loneliness of a stolen adolescence, and against the gender biases that never truly left the bluegrass world. And yet, it was in those hard years that Alison forged her resilience. The fragile girl became a challenger of every doubt cast her way. And from those struggles, a great dream began to unfold, though it came at the cost of pains invisible to the audience. Career success. As the 1990s began, Alison Krauss stepped out of the shadow of being a fiddle prodigy and into the light of a true artist. In 1990, at just 19 years old, she released I've Got That Old Feeling. It wasn't just an album of youth. It was a bold knock on the doors of the Bluegrass Hall of Fame. And that knock was answered. The album earned her very first Grammy, a victory that signaled the rebirth of a genre many had dismissed as fading. In that moment, Alison was no longer just the fiddle girl. She had become a national star. Success followed quickly. In 1992, Alison and Union Station released Every Time You Say Goodbye. Another Grammy, another message to the world. Her first triumph was no fluke. She was here for the long haul. Alison Krauss had carved her place into the map of American music. In 1994, at only 23, Alison walked onto the sacred stage of the Grand Ole Opry and became one of the youngest members ever inducted. A girl from the flatlands of Illinois now stood tall in Nashville, the beating heart of country music. And the following year, 1995, she stunned mainstream audiences with her tender version of When You Say Nothing at All. Once a Keith Whitley classic, under Alison's crystalline voice, the song bloomed into something new, eternal, unforgettable. From country radio waves to living rooms across America, her voice slipped into the hearts of millions, carrying her beyond the boundaries of bluegrass and into the mainstream spotlight. As the decade drew to a close, Alison only expanded her reach. In 1997, So Long, So Wrong brought yet another Grammy, solidifying her place at the very center of the genre. 2 years later, in 1999, she dared to experiment with Forget About It, a record that leaned toward pop country. The gamble worked. Suddenly, even listeners who had never heard a banjo or fiddle in their lives were falling under the spell of her voice. If the 1990s were the years of breakthrough and recognition, then the 2000s were Alison's golden age. In 2000, she lent her voice to the soundtrack of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? No one expected a Hollywood film to ignite an entire musical revolution. Yet the soundtrack sold over 8 million copies, won the Grammy for Album of the Year, and sparked a full-blown bluegrass revival. Across America, people rediscovered the soul of their country through those ancient-sounding harmonies. And Alison Krauss was the face of that revival. From there, the triumphs came in waves. New Favorite, 2001, Live, 2002, Lonely Runs Both Ways, 2004. Each release brought more Grammys, more acclaim. For a time, it seemed as if anything Alison touched became a classic. But her greatest explosion came in 2007, when she joined forces with Robert Plant, the legendary frontman of Led Zeppelin. At first, critics scoffed. How could a thunderous rock god merge with the fragile, glass-like voice of Alison Krauss? But then Raising Sand was born, and the world went silent in awe. The record swept the globe, and by 2009 it had won 5 Grammys, including Album of the Year. With that victory, Alison became the most decorated female Grammy winner in history at that time. From a small-town girl in Illinois, she had become a global icon, transcending every boundary of genre. Yet glory never lasts forever. As the 2010s began, Alison faced the darkest battle of her life. From 2010 to 2013, she slowly disappeared from the stage, gripped by dysphonia, a vocal disorder that robbed her of control over her own chords. For a singer, it was nothing less than a death sentence. In 2011, she still managed to release Paper Airplane with Union Station, but afterward, the silence grew longer, heavier. The music world was shaken. Fans whispered the same question. Would Alison's crystal voice ever return? Then, against all odds, in 2017, she re-emerged. After 18 long years without a solo album, Alison released Windy City. It debuted at number 9 on the Billboard 200 and was met with glowing praise from critics. It wasn't the same voice as before, maybe rougher around the edges, tinged with time and struggle, but it carried new weight, new depth, richer than ever before. It was proof that even broken voices can still sing truths more powerful than perfection. By the 2020s, Alison proved once more that she was more than a survivor. She was unshakable. In 2021, she reunited with Robert Plant to record Raise the Roof. The album was instantly celebrated by critics and audiences alike, a reminder that their chemistry was no accident but a timeless force. In 2022 and 2023, the two embarked on a major tour across America and Europe. Fans wept watching her stand strong on stage, a living testament to endurance after years of silence. And even now, in 2024 and 2025, Alison Krauss appears selectively at Americana and bluegrass festivals. She no longer floods the stage with constant performances, but every time she does, it feels like an event. Because Alison Krauss is no longer just a star. She is the living queen of bluegrass. Her journey, from a 14-year-old signing with Rounder Records, to a 27-time Grammy winner, to the silence of illness and the triumphant return with a voice marked by time, proves that true glory is not found in perfection, but in the strength to rise again after you've been broken. Controversy and tragedy. The stage lights blazed, the applause thundered. Alison Krauss was at the very peak of her career. Yet behind the curtain, after the halls had emptied and the lights had gone dark, a silent tragedy was eating away at her, and no one could see it. Not until it was far too late. For years, Alison had been untouchable. Award after award, her name was celebrated by critics and adored by fans. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. Concerts were canceled. Interviews vanished. A suffocating silence fell. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was Alison burned out? Were there fights within Union Station? Or had she simply grown tired of Nashville's relentless grind? The press began circling. Some asked outright, had Alison Krauss retired for good? Tabloids fed on speculation, whispering of breakdowns, secret scandals, even mental collapse. The shadows around her name grew darker, but the truth was crueler than any rumor. Alison Krauss had been diagnosed with dysphonia, a vocal disorder that stripped her of control over her own chords. For an ordinary person, it would be devastating. But for a singer, for someone hailed as the voice of Crystal, it was a slow-motion death sentence. Imagine it. The very voice that once silenced the world now betrayed her. Notes wavered, cracked, fell apart mid-air. The stage, once her kingdom, became a place of terror. She began refusing performances, refusing interviews, retreating from the spotlight that once adored her. Those closest to her recall haunting nights. Alison sitting alone in a dark room, clutching a microphone but too afraid to sing a single note. Every sound that escaped felt like a knife twisting in her chest. There were nights she lay awake whispering to herself, "If I lose my voice. Then, who am I? The silence grew into a full-blown crisis. Nashville whispered, "Alison Krauss is finished." Headlines screamed, "Bluegrass star collapses." The end of Alison Krauss? Meanwhile, her Union Station bandmates scrambled in the shadows, trying to carry on without the very heart of their group. To heal, doctors gave her a brutal prescription: absolute silence. No singing, little speaking, for months. For Alison, music had always been breath, life itself. Now silence became her prison. Friends noticed the change. She laughed less, spoke less, her eyes distant, haunted. Her perfectionism, once her sharpest weapon, now turned into a heavy curse. The questions in her mind became merciless. If I can't sing as I once did, will anyone want to hear me? If I return and fail, will all those years of glory shatter before my eyes? Her long absence became fertile ground for gossip. Some said she had a secret illness. Others whispered of inter-band feuds. A few even invented tales of broken romances and private scandals. But none of them grasped the painful truth. Alison Krauss, 27-time Grammy winner, was not fighting tabloids. She was fighting her own voice. Nights became battles. One day she'd try to sing a few notes only to fail and break down in tears. The next day she'd try again. And then, once in a while, a miracle. A single note would hold. A melody would land whole. Small victories, flickers of light in the darkness, just enough to keep her from giving up. For her fans, it was a terrifying silence. They missed Alison, the crystal voice that once soothed their souls. But they could not know the war being fought behind closed doors. A battle not just for her career, but for her very identity. And so the question lingered, heavy and unanswered. Would Alison Krauss ever return? Or had her light already gone out, swallowed forever by silence? Personal life. Behind the stage lights, Alison Krauss was never one for noise or glamour. Her heart belonged to the simple things: family, friendships, and the quiet bonds that hold strong even when the world isn't watching. Unlike many of her country contemporaries, Alison never craved the spotlight beyond her music. She chose a private life, almost reclusive at times. Nashville reporters often complained that information about her personal life was rare and that scarcity was no accident. It was her choice. In the late 1990s, Alison married musician Pat Bergeson. The marriage lasted only a few years, but from it came her most treasured gift, her son, Sam, born in 1999. To Alison, Sam was her private music, a song no audience would ever hear, but the most important composition of her life. During her hardest battles with illness, it was Sam who gave her the reason not to give up. Even after the marriage ended, Alison maintained a kind and respectful relationship with her ex-husband. She once said, "Music can take you far, but family keeps you grounded." Sam grew up surrounded by music, often traveling with his mother on tour. Every now and then, audiences would glimpse a softer side of Alison. Her smile, glowing quietly as she watched her little boy running backstage. Beyond her household, Alison also had another family, Union Station. For her, the band was not just colleagues, but brothers, her emotional anchor. When illness forced Alison into silence, her bandmates never pressured her to return. They waited, patiently, respectfully holding the flame for her until she was ready. That loyalty, that bond, was part of what carried Alison through her darkest years. In daily life, Alison was known for her humility, her quietness, even a touch of shyness. She never chased fashion, never appeared on reality shows, never stirred headlines with shocking statements. Sometimes her absence from the public eye fueled curiosity, but in truth, That quietness was her shield against the storms of fame. While other artists were often swept into scandal, Alison chose silence. She spent her time reading, playing the fiddle, and cherishing rare moments of peace. It was this quiet rhythm of life that preserved her spirit, so that when she returned, she could return whole, authentic, still herself. In the loud, chaotic world of Nashville, Alison Krauss was an exception. She never tried to become a figure of controversy. She only ever wanted to be a mother, a friend, an artist, a human being who knew how to love, how to hurt, and how to stay silent when silence was the only way to endure. Legacy and influence. American music has many legends, but Alison Krauss is one of the rare few who didn't just represent a genre, she transformed the way the world understood it. Before Alison arrived, bluegrass was often seen as mountain music from Appalachia, raw, rustic, and rarely stepping beyond its small communities. But with her crystalline voice and masterful fiddle, Alison achieved what once seemed impossible. She carried bluegrass into the global spotlight. When Alison sang, her sound crossed every boundary. Country fans found tenderness. Pop audiences discovered a gentle familiarity. Critics called it a rare, pure form of music that reaches the very core of the human soul. She didn't just create hits. She built bridges between tradition and modernity. From I've Got That Old Feeling to Raising Sand, Alison proved that bluegrass could live in any era if it was fueled by sincerity. With more than 27 Grammy Awards, she became the most decorated female artist in Grammy history, leaving her peers far behind. Her influence wasn't confined to charts. Alison opened doors for an entire generation of women in bluegrass and Americana, a space once dominated by men. Younger artists like Sarah Watkins, Sierra Hull, and even a young Taylor Swift have cited her as inspiration, living proof that women could master the fiddle and that they too could become the face of a genre. Her role in the Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Soundtrack helped ignite a cultural revival of folk and bluegrass in the early 21st century. The album sold millions, but more importantly, it drew a younger generation back to the roots of American music. Thanks to Alison, forgotten sounds found new life, and roots music once again became part of the national conversation. Her influence stretched even beyond bluegrass. Rockers, pop stars, and country legends alike wanted to sing beside her because her voice was like pure light, softening and elevating any song it touched. From Dolly Parton to James Taylor, from Robert Plant to countless others, they all agreed. Alison wasn't just an artist, she was a catalyst, making music itself more beautiful. Perhaps Alison Krauss's greatest legacy cannot be measured in awards or record sales. It lies in how she made people feel. Fans may forget countless popular singers, but few ever forget the sensation of hearing Alison sing, as if a voice from heaven, fragile yet eternal, had reached down to comfort them. In a world where music grows louder and noisier by the day, Alison Krauss stands as proof that sometimes gentleness is the most enduring strength of all. And that is the legacy that will live on, long after the final stage lights have dimmed. Later life. Some comebacks don't need fireworks. They don't need noise. They arrive quietly, truthfully, and because of that, they touch the heart even more deeply. After years of silence brought on by dysphonia, Alison Krauss finally found the light at the end of the tunnel. She no longer chased the perfect voice she once had. Instead, she learned to live with the cracks, to turn them into part of her music. In her first days back in the studio, Alison admitted, "I don't sing the way I used to, but that doesn't matter. What matters is, I can still sing." That humility gave her music more weight, more soul than ever before. In 2017, she released Windy City, a rare solo project filled with personal spirit. The album immediately drew attention, climbing the Billboard 200 and earning critical praise. It was proof that Alison was still Alison, only now more mature, more seasoned, more human. By 2021, she once again stunned audiences by reuniting with Robert Plant for Raise the Roof. This was not just a continuation of Raising Sand. It was proof that Alison still hungered to create, to connect through music. The album earned Grammy recognition, and their joint tours became major events, drawing in even young fans who had only come for Plant, but left mesmerized by Krauss's crystalline voice. On today's stage, Alison no longer chases perfection. She smiles more, opens up more, and accepts that a note may slip out of place. But it is precisely that honesty, that raw sincerity, that pierces the hearts of her listeners. In her daily life, Alison has chosen simplicity. She spends more time with her son Sam, with her family, and with herself. No longer bound to exhausting tour schedules or endless commitments, she chooses her performances carefully, only for projects that truly move her. For Alison, music is no longer a race, but a journey of gratitude. And perhaps the most beautiful thing of all is this: after everything, the audience never left. They waited patiently, and they welcomed her back. Every time Alison appears, even for just a brief performance, the room falls silent. Because they are not only hearing a singer, they are witnessing a survivor who has walked through darkness and returned to the light with scars and strength in her voice. Today, Alison Krauss's life is no longer measured in numbers, awards, or records. It is a new chapter, one where she sings less, lives slower, but carries more depth than ever before. And maybe that is what her fans treasure most: an Alison who no longer hides, no longer strains, but sings with serenity. Her voice now a gift of survival itself. The lights of Nashville have long since dimmed. The applause has faded into memory. And yet somewhere, in an old radio, in the hearts of those who once trembled at her sound, the crystal voice of Alison Krauss still lingers, fragile, tender, but powerful enough to pierce through time. Her life was a symphony of every note imaginable. It began as a little fiddle prodigy in Illinois, rose into the reigning queen of bluegrass, and then fell silent when illness stole her voice. For a moment, it seemed like the end. But Alison proved one timeless truth: real light never disappears. It only waits for the moment to shine again. She returned, not with flawless notes, but with a soul that had walked through the dark, with a voice carrying the scars of survival. And it was those very scars that made her music more beautiful, more true. Alison Krauss leaves behind more than 27 Grammy Awards, more than unforgettable albums. She leaves proof that sometimes survival itself is the greatest act of artistry. In a world of noise, Alison chose to whisper. And it was those whispers that shook millions of hearts, leaving a legacy that will live on, even after the final stage light fades to black. Do you remember the first time you heard Alison Krauss's voice? How did it touch you? Share your story below, because every memory, every feeling becomes part of the endless song she has left us. And if you want to continue this journey with us, through the glory and the heartbreak of music's greatest legends, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell. The next story is waiting, just after the last note of this violin fades away.